Welcome once again to the Radio Conference Call, a podcast by radio people, for radio people, and for folks that love entertainment, love finding out more about the radio broadcasting industry. Today is our third and final installment with Northwest radio icon Jerry Isenhart. Jerry, how you been this week?
Been great. Thank you so much. And let me just say thank you to the many people that have viewed parts 1 and 2. I've had a lot of email from friends, answered lots of questions, had some good feedback and comments about our interviews so far. Thank you. This series is really outstanding, and I just personally really appreciate the ability to be able to, in one setting, tell the whole story, because it's a very complicated story, and it's something I have not been able to do on my own.
Well, I'm sure very pleased and proud, Jerry, and honored to be part of this storytelling of the KOZI and Jerry Isenhart legacy. When we left off, Jerry, we left off with the sale of KOZI Radio, AM and FM, and Coho Radio, and the sale of Go Lake Chelan. I want to dive back into KOZI, back into Chelan, and if we can kind of start with, you know, the kind of people you surrounded yourself with in business.
You know what? We were really lucky right from the get-go. Of course, my longtime partner, associate, friend, Steve Byquist, that joined me off in the get-go. Without Steve, I don't know if we would have gotten off the ground, but the two of us together made an incredible combination. And what, you know, it was interesting. We talked earlier about maybe some of the highlights of our 30 years at KOZI Radio, and a lot of people think that 1994 and the Tyee fire was the biggest fire to ever hit this region. That, by the way, that was an event for which KOZI was given incredible recognition across the state, around the community, around Central Washington, et cetera. But the reality was, if we go back to 1970 and 1971, shortly after we'd arrived in town, Steve and I walked into a community that was inundated with two major years of forest fires in 1970 and 71. And they were called the 4th of July Mountain Fire, the Slide Ridge Fire, I don't remember all the names of the fires, but they were just the same. They were huge forest fires in that period of time, and we were the new kids in town. And now I want to say this, that we came to this community as broadcasters who had come out of contemporary radio of the 60s, and our goal was, we thought for sure that we would be able to come to Lake Chelan. After all, Lake Chelan was the town where the dances were held at the dance halls in Chelan. Anyway, Lake Chelan was a town for young people that was pretty lively and was pretty contemporary. But for the overall community, it was an older group of people that were agriculturalists and stuff. So the boys, the new kids in town, we were going to program a radio station, and we were going to bring the top 40 radio to town, and that's what we set out to do. And we executed it, I think, quite well. Steve and I think I told you this earlier, we worked weekends on the air so that the visitors that came to Chelan for the weekend would hear the best quality broadcasters we had. And it wasn't easy on those days to be better than the broadcasters in Wenatchee, because Wenatchee always put their worst broadcasters on the weekends. So we came and we were here, but summer came in 1970 and we had fires. And those fires, we turned the radio station into an information center. And when the Forest Service and the DNR and all the other people realized that these young guys at the radio station were really interested, we became information headquarters. And you know how they put the boards out at the post office with all the maps and all that stuff? Well, back in those days, they used to bring all those stuff into the radio station, and we'd have these long-winded interviews and conversations with the forest fighters and the spokesman for the forest fighters. that was early on. I mean, that was really early on in the public relations aspect of the Forest Service and forest firefighting. But we became a hub of the information in 70 and 71. And then people people that remember the Tyee fire of 94 think, well, that was the first time it ever happened. Actually, that was not by any means. And we were actually honored and given some awards and community awards, et cetera, in 70 and 71. But the more important thing about that, okay, and by the way, some of the things we learned that were really influential, Wally Peterson, who was a pilot and a really incredible pilot, had a P-51, used to give air shows over Chelan, but he also had a Cessna 310, and he took Byquist up in the 310, and we borrowed a mobile telephone that was a little Motorola portable mobile telephone. And Steve would go up and fly over these fires and do these live reports from in the air. And and another pilot, Cal Kelly, that had a helicopter, started giving us rides way back then and taking us up over some of the fires and stuff. And all of a sudden, we began to shift the thrust of who we were from a music station to an information station. And that's where that all started. And so it's interesting that by 1972, in the fall of 71, after 2 years of aiding in the community's knowledge of local news, we realized that a talk show where we could talk about community concerns would be appropriate. And that's how the Second Cup got founded. Was we made that decision in the fall of 71, and we kicked it off on January 1st, 72. And we weren't sure how it would go, but obviously it was a good call. But, from day one, we began to have, we got lots of phone calls. We had one problem back then. In 1972, and I need to tell another piece of history to make it relevant.
Okay.
When we arrived in 1970, the telephone systems in Chelan and Lake Chelan Valley were old. You picked up the phone and you got an operator and you said, I want to call Chelan Airways 1, Chelan 1. That's how and the operator patched you in, but there was no dial tone. There was no touch tone. So it would have been impossible to have a talk show in 1970 on the telephone. Telephone calls to a radio station would have been a nightmare because, first of all, most of them were party lines with 6 or 8 people on the line. And if one person on the line was calling, waiting to get on the air, somebody else was going to be on there saying, "Hey, I need to use the phone," or "Would you get off the phone," or whatever they said. Party lines were not great. They wouldn't have been great for radio. So it was the birth of a telephone industry improvement in 1970 that kind of set the stage for us to be able to do in 1972 the Second Cup of Coffee. And I only point that out because I was thinking about how what's really happened is that how the internet as a technological change really changed the role of the print media and the broadcast media. And in today's world, that was the equivalent of what happened in Chelan in 1970 when Chelan went from the old style party line crank on the telephones, to dial telephone service. That was a huge technological change that facilitated that we could do Second Cup of Coffee by 1972.
Jerry, so while you were at KOZI, the phone number was 440?
That's correct. When I walked in the door, the phone number was 440. And when we applied to the FCC, and we put that phone number down on the application, we got it back with a note that said, "We need more than your area code." And we said, no, the area code's 509, and then the number is 440. And they said, "It can't be." Well, we actually had to contact Senator Jackson's office in Washington, D.C., and have his staff go over and explain to the commission staff that we lived in a very rural part of the state for which there still was not ordinary telephone service. Isn't that amazing?
That's really something. And, Jerry, getting back to the fire coverage, neither you or Steve really came from a news background. You guys kind of had to figure this out and kind of build the plane while it was taking off, right?
That was true, more so for Steve than me, because when I'd gone to WSU, I had gotten into news because that was part of my education. But we were both we were both disc jockeys. That's the truth. We loved radio. We loved personality radio. We loved music radio, and so that's what we thought we were bringing to Lake Chelan at the time we arrived. 2 years later, we well understood that the information was really what the community wanted. And there was another reason, and that was this: the only other source of local information was a weekly newspaper, and there wasn't anything wrong with it, except it wasn't real timely. People had to wait a week to find out what happened in that car wreck last Thursday, or who died in the last week, or who got married, or whatever. So we had this chance to be instantaneous, live, local information, and people were hungry for it. And so a talk show in the morning in which they became participants in the conversation was wonderful. And so not only was there Byquist and Isenhart, there were 3,000 other people that lived in the valley at that time, or four or five, whatever it was, wasn't too many, that had the potential to participate. And and they did. And we had all kinds of characters. I didn't mention it. We had a lady named Maud who used to call up and read her poetry and sing. We had a guy named Charlie who used to play his guitar and call up and sing. We had a guy named Leon. Uh, Leon. Oh, I'll think of his anyway. Leon, who was the first guy that ever spoke a swear word on KOZI radio, and in a conversation over some modest controversial thing, he said, "Well, I'd take him out and kick him in the ass," or something like that. Not words that were used or heard on radio back in those days, for sure. You
Oh,
know,
man.
I, you know, but we actually, by the way, Leon was such a character that one day we invited him to come in and host the second cup of coffee, and he was hilarious. It was a show of its own. I wished we had a recording of that. I have not found one yet. Uh, I do have some clips of when Leon would call up. He was a redneck, and he was kind of an outspoken guy, and he told it like it was. Um, Gosh, I'm so sorry I can't pick out his name out of my head right now. I'm sure other people out there know. Anyway, so yeah, the experiences of 1970 and 71 with news did help us make that transition from being a we thought we were bringing top 40 radio to Lake Chelan. After all, that's where all the dances were. That's where all the action was in our minds. And we realized that information was that Byquist actually became the newsman, and he attended most of the meetings. And he was, by the way, an excellent newsman. I mean, just intuitively, Steve had all the skills, and great interviewer, great on the scene news reporter. I can't say more about Steve's capacity. So as I started to say, when we first arrived, we went up in Wally Peterson's uh, Cessna and flew over these fires, and Steve gave these aerial views of how big things were and where the action was. And then we got up. Then we also flew up in the Kelly's helicopter and did the same kinds of things. And there's a certain amount of drama, a theater that comes with any of this. Maybe not necessary, but it adds to the dimension. Radio is a little bit of a theater of the mind. And so all of the sound effects of the engines in the helicopter and the engines in the airplane, and all of those sounds added to the broadcast just created a real sense of realism that made KOZI's broadcast very, very real. And they were clearly out of studio. They weren't studio quality broadcasts. People loved it.
And Jerry, by the way, did I ever tell you that I have a name for that kind of reporting? It's giving the word's eye view.
The word's eye view. I like it. I love it. Well, interestingly, go ahead.
No, I was just Wondering if there were any major fire events between 71, 72 until the big fires of 94.
Oh yeah, there were many fires, not just fires, but many stories. Probably
Yeah.
Mount St. Helens would be an example where we mustered a crew instantly, and when Mount St. Helens went off, and we had people in the field. Interestingly, I called upon my ham radio background to listen to the ham radio people that were in Yakima having a convention when Mount St. Helens went off. And I managed to learn more there than I learned from the Associated Press or anything else. And so we had Scott Brundage, who had studied the he knew Mount Helens was going to blow. And he had done a lot of interviews about Mount St. Helens and its delicate posture. So when the mountain blew, Brundage went into the studio and he already had the phone number of the store in the little town right there at the base of the mountain. And he called up that store and talked to the clerk at the store and said, "Tell us what's going on, you know." And she said, "Well, we're still pumping gas and we're still selling ice cream, but we're going to be having to get out of here any minute now." I mean, so KOZI's ability, by as time passed, we just became better and better at being on the scene of events. I can't remember the Riverwalk building burned downtown, and we were there. And I mean, the fruit warehouses that burned down, country uh, country fruit warehouse over by the bowling alley that burned down, and on and on. I mean, whenever something happened in this town, we were there, and that was the. It just got better and better, and of course, as we got more people in the field equipped with two-way radios, this was all before cellular, but we had these extended microphones that we could take our radio station and go anywhere, certainly within the valley. I mean, actually, I will tell you that when the railroad car in Wenatchee exploded, what year was that? About 74, I think it was about 1974 when the railroad car exploded down in the South Wenatchee. We had installed a mobile news unit in my father's car about 2 weeks before, and my dad was still living in Wenatchee. He was the first newsman on the scene because he happened to be driving down Wenatchee Avenue when he saw it happen. So he drove right down there and he called in, and we had Don Isenhart, Cub reporter, giving us these blow by blow descriptions long before anybody else even had the story on the air. And the people from Wenatchee called us and asked us if they could use our audio in order to put on their stations. As a matter of fact, that's how good it was. So, yeah, we did a lot, but news became our forte. That's the truth. Information wasn't all news, wasn't all hardcore. Some of it was fun. Once in a while, I remember doing an interview with a guy that was riding through town on a horse, and it was obviously something going on. And so I pulled him over and said, "Hey, I'm with KOZI Radio. Do you mind talking to me?" And he said, "No, what?" I said, you're obviously on a mission here. What's going on?" And he was a guy that was riding a horse from the Canadian border to Canada or to Mexican border. And so we interviewed him and he went on his way. But the most important thing about KOZI back in those days, and I think as long as I was there, is you never knew what was going to be next. And that's because the realm of our connection was bigger than our studio. We made our connection the entire community. So a listener could call us in and give us more information than we would have ever got sat in the studio. So they would call and give us a description of a boat sinking off the yacht club. Pretty good, you know. Maybe we'd take a boat and run up there. We did, by the way. I mean, I can tell you so many stories of things on the lake. I was up lake at the yacht club the night that the Mitchell Creek flood, when a wall of water 30 feet high came down Mitchell Creek and sunk 2 or 3 boats that were tied up at the Mitchell Creek dock, and the people that were camped there ran for high ground. And when I woke up that morning, I was tied up at the yacht club. But when I tied up, I got in my boat and I went up. I had to weave through oh my gosh, the lake was a solid debris. But I was talking on the air. I mean, I was talking to Steve back at the studio, giving reports of all of this action. Most people didn't even know it had happened. And so here we were talking about this gigantic flood coming down Mitchell Creek. And well, we didn't even know exactly what had happened. We just knew something had happened. There'd been a horrible storm the night before, a lightning and thunderstorm, heavy rain. The heavy rain had set the topsoil loose because the topsoil was loose because of the fire the previous year. You can understand that. So when it rained, all that topsoil just started sliding, and all of a sudden, this wall of mud came down Mitchell Creek Canyon, and you can still see the marks on the canyon if you go up there, but it's like 30 feet high. And the people that were camped there, when I got over there and rescued them, and that's actually, I was there more of a as a rescue boat than a news reporter boat. So I got them on my boat and I took them back across the lake. But as we were going back across the lake, of course, I got a chance to interview them. So we had incredible interviews. I don't know where they are, by the way. I think I do. I think I've seen them. But anyway, so lots of things happened. Information became our forte.
Jerry, I have so much respect and admiration for you as a human being and for a truly professional radio broadcaster. In doing what I do, and I know the business, I've been around it quite a while. You accomplished so much of this with a very small staff.
That's true. I really dedicated staff. That's probably the more important thing because there was nobody on the staff that didn't really get it. Nobody said, I don't want to do this. They all said, can I please be part of it? And so when we hired people that we hoped were qualified to be part of it. And we trained a lot of people. We took a lot of the people that weren't maybe skilled and took them out and trained them. But a lot of people learned on the job too. And I think I told you when we hired the secretary at the front desk, one of the things we looked at was, did this person have the capacity to be to go on the air, to do commercials, to deal in sales and all the other things. So yeah, we thank you. We did a lot with our staff, but you know what? There's another piece to that. We had the benefit of a community that supported us and were our unpaid volunteer staff members. And remember, I told you we had as many as 35 or 40 mobile news units
Yeah,
in the field, of which
yeah.
probably 20 of those were non-paid members of the community and non-paid members of the radio station, but were members of the community. And so we had lots. I mean, everyone in the community was part of us, and I think that's who we were. We were a family in total. The radio station was just one of the facilitators to make it happen.
Hey, Jerry, you came in as mid to late 20s, very young man, and you and Byquist pretty much running KOZI. As far as the on-air aspect goes, do you remember some of your first clients you had, and can you talk about some of the businesses that came and went out of Chelan? Do you remember your first client? I mean, real big client you had?
Well, when we walked through the door, we had that staple of clients that had been with KOZI for years. That would be Kelly's Hardware, Green's Drug, there was Chelan Department Store, Chelan Shoe Store, and Men's Apparel. There was another hardware store called Valley Hardware. Um, those would have been the key people. And then you ask about people who came and went. There was a crazy guy who opened a music store, and he sold band instruments. He probably gave music lessons. He was a really funny guy. He was a classic of a entertainer, musician, personality, kind of out a little bit wacko. One of the things I remember about him was he loved snowmobiling, and you really shouldn't snowmobile by yourself, and yet he did it all the time. And he went up on the butte one day, and he went down the other side and couldn't get back up, so he decided to go through the tunnel. He went down and got on the highway and rode his snowmobile up through the tunnel. Well, just as he was going through the tunnel, he meets a state patrolman. he got in a lot of trouble. But anyway, so he had a music store and he sold band instruments and he repaired them and stuff. He was here for a short period of time. Um, I'll tell you the interesting story of. I said there were three hardware stores. Actually, there was a Coast to Coast, a Kelly's Hardware, and a Valley Hardware. And Kelly's and Valley were across the street from each other on Main Street. And the owner of Valley Hardware was relatively new. He bought it from a longtime owner, and he came and he had a good business, and he decided he wanted to make his business grow, and he needed more parking, and so he bought a vacant lot over kind of near Lakeview Drive-In on the corner there. That's now the Red Apple. That's the Chelan Red Apple market. But he built the building over there, and it was a beautiful building with all glass front. It was a very classy building, and his wife was into uh, I don't know, glassware, kitchens, things for kitchens, and unfortunately, so his hardware store, which had been in the PVC pipe and plumbing supplies and all the things that a typical nails and hammers and all screwdrivers and all the things that a hardware store might be involved with. Suddenly, the store was kind of half and half, and I think a lot of farmers who went in there didn't feel comfortable. They felt like they were in just a little bit of a Macy's kind of a store. It was beautiful. And by the way, they became our largest client at that time. They spent an immense amount of money on advertising, but the fact was they just never made the switch. Never made it work, and it went out of business in a couple 3 years, and then it became Gordon's supermarket, Thriftway Market. Gordon Martin, that had the Thriftway in Cashmere, bought it and opened up Gordon's Market, and it's been a grocery store ever since. I've been very successful as a grocery store. Yeah.
You know, going back to when you guys first took over KOZI, what are some of the businesses that were with you then that still thrive to this day? I know you mentioned Kelly's Ace Hardware.
I think Kelly's would be probably the one that stands out in my mind, and the boat company, Lakeshland Boat Company, although it's got new owners, still a good client.
What about the Apple Cup? That's been around for a while.
Apple Cup, thank you. Apple Cup was a client then, as a client today, always been there, and pretty much has been who it is today, been kind of a gathering spot for locals. Absolutely. Apple Cup was a good client.
And the bowling alley, which is still here to this day.
The bowling alley actually was a good client. In fact, the very first year we were here, Jack Rains, who owned it for all of the time that I was at KOZI Radio, Jack Rains asked us to come over and put on a live broadcast from his bowling alley, and we put on a dance over there for the members of the community in the bowling alley. And I think as I recall, we had to even get approval from the liquor board to do that back then. So by the way, that was our introduction to Chelan. Jack Rains was actually a really good friend of KOZI throughout our entire history. He and Steve became really good friends, and because of Steve's affinity for boating. And but Jack and Marilyn, good people, and good advertising sponsors on KOZI. Absolutely.
You know, there's a photo that you sent me. You're I don't know if you were actually broadcasting live at the time, but you were on, I think, Wooden Avenue on some rollerblades.
Oh yeah.
What was the name of that little cafe that was there?
Well, that was the coffee. No,
the Crockery, something like that.
The Crockery, yeah.
What was that like?
Well, the Crockery was actually built. Gosh, that used to be a lumber yard. All of that area that whole corner was a lumber yard, Chelan lumber, and the Crockery was the creation of Vic Haight. Vic Haight was a former chief of police, and I think, and had operated the resort at the Lucerne, and then came down lake and started Chelan taxi service. And he opened up the crockery, and he took a portion of what used to be the lumber yard. The lumber yard had closed by then, and he built a restaurant and a coffee shop, and he ran his taxi service out of there as well. He and his wife Eula, and it was a very, very popular spot. KOZI made it the home of many of our month of heritage broadcasts, where we actually went over there and set up our gear and invited the community to come into the crockery and sit down when we interviewed people, historical people, about the history of Chelan. And it worked really well because we got a lot of kibitzers. We got a lot of people that came and sat in the audience and then said, "Well, that's not quite the truth, Fred. Let me tell you the truth." And then Brundage would say, "Well, Fred, come on, Bill, come on up here and let's get you in this conversation." And then they'd have a conversation, and then they'd say to Fred or to Bill, whomever, "Well, we're going to have you back tomorrow. Then we'll come back and we'll get your side of the story tomorrow." So it was a great. I mean, once again, we took the microphones out of the studio, took them to public places, and we didn't really worry about the crashing and banging of the glasses and all the noise that came with it. People were interested in the content, and as long as they could audibly hear the content reasonably, that's what carried the programs. And the programs from the crockery back in those days were very popular.
Jerry Isenhart joining on this edition of the radio conference call, part 3 of 3. Jerry, when you pulled into Chelan on the end of the year around 1969, did you even remotely think you would ever be the mayor of Chelan?
Never, never,
What
never.
what led up to your mayorship?
I had gotten very interested in local government through KOZI's involvement in the news stories of the city. And there had been a mayor who was elected in, I believe, 1972, named Phil Goodall. And Goodall was somewhat controversial. He ran against a guy named Lyle Taylor, and Lyle Taylor was the president of the Chamber of Commerce. So in some ways, it was the business people against the community. Phil Goodall kind of representing the grassroots community, and Goodall's campaign was really done on coffee clutches and homes. He went around and met with the community one-on-one in all sorts of people's homes, and he won. Well, one of the first things he did when he was elected was he went into City Hall. In the old days, the city council met in a room about 4 by 8, and literally, if people waited outside for their turn to go in and make their presentations or hear the city council. And Goodall said, "That's wrong. The meetings ought to be open to the public, and the whole public ought to be able to go in and sit down." And I know, even as a newsman, we would go to those meetings, those early meetings in 1970, 71. We would go to those meetings at City Hall and they gave us a chair inside that room that was dedicated to us, but they weren't real happy that we were there because we were reporting on the goings on of the city government of the city. When Goodall was elected, he revamped City Hall. He made what was a large auditorium and a large dais at the head of the room, and he basically opened the meetings up so the community could participate. I was impressed with him. He was very controversial. He wasn't always liked by a lot of people, but frankly, I thought he really did a good job. He was very skeptical of the news people, of myself, and of the radio station. But over time, he and I became friends. And finally, when there was a seat on the city council opened in 1974, and he was up for re-election, I ran. I won. He lost. I was looking forward to working with him as a member of the city council and him being the mayor. I won. He lost. So that was kind of a sad day for me. So I served on the city council for 4 years, and then I moved out of the district. I moved to Manson, where I was building a house, So I stepped down or didn't run for reelection. And I was gone for a while.
So, Jerry, when you built your place in Manson, you left the Chelan City Council.
That's correct. And I was gone for 3 or 4 years. And then I moved, I had moved to Manson, built a house, my wife and I ended up being separated. I moved back into Chelan, and the council drafted me back into the council and said, "We've got a vacancy on the council. Would you consider being on the council?" And I said, "Sure. Why not?" Uh, so I was back serving on the city council again. And to be honest with you, the term I had was about to expire, and so I just decided I was going to let it expire because I was going to go back to Manson and try to put my marriage back together. And that was just a personal in my brain thought. And on a particular night, the mayor, the existing mayor, who had Skip Gores, decided to resign, and he wanted to step down and become made city administrator. So it was a long, convoluted discussion, to say the least. But he did step down, and I was appointed by my fellow council members as mayor. And it was something I never thought I would see, but I thought, wow, what an honor. And I thought, well, I'll do this, and I'll just do it for a while. And there were some problems. The city was at a standstill. City had a moratorium on construction that had been imposed by the Department of Ecology. And so there were some major tasks that I thought I could help with, and I did. And so then I ran for reelection and was elected. And so there you are. In the midst of all of that, my father died. And shortly thereafter, my city administrator resigned. And so that's a story that probably ought to be told sometime, is about the resignation of a city administrator. And I basically looked at all the facts and said, you know what? I need to get back to my business. I need to get back to my personal life. I love serving the city as mayor, but I really need to step down. And so I ended up stepping down. I don't remember the year exactly. I have it here someplace, but so I stepped down, and that was the end of my political career. I loved it. I loved it. There was no greater honor.
What were some of the more complex issues that came up when you were in office?
Well, the police department had some significant problems, and there were questionable activities going on in the department. And I ended up bringing in a group called LEMAP, the Law Enforcement Management Assistance Program, which is a group of people made up of sheriffs and police chiefs of police of larger cities, and they come in and they do an audit of your police department. And they did the audit, and they came to me and handed me this book that was about 3 inches thick that listed about a couple hundred significant issues that needed to be resolved in the police department. The police department simply was not up to speed. So I turned to the city administrator, whom I hired, and I said, "Well, there's the so we took that report to the city legal attorneys and our legal counsel and asked them their recommendations on this." And because the LEMAP people said we needed to rebuild the police department from the ground up, which meant we needed to let the chief of police go, et cetera. And I turned that assignment over to the city administrator. And anyway, and I'll tell you what happened. She delayed the action. And then my father passed away, and I took a 30-day leave of absence. And then in that 30-day leave of absence, the city administrator put the chief of police under civil service and could not be terminated. Well, I was extremely disappointed because she knew exactly what the assignment was, and she had really gone behind my back. And I remember talking to her about it, and I said, "This is not acceptable." Well, 30 or 60 or 90 days later, I don't remember, but somewhere not long after that, I learned that she was also in the process of trying to put her her position under civil service, city administrator position under civil service, so that she could not be terminated by the mayor at the
Oh,
will of the mayor. And so I met with her and I said, Joyce, if you want to be the mayor, run for the mayor. And a day later, she offered her resignation and said she was leaving to go open a furniture store in Bellevue or something, and she
oh,
was gone. So it was when Joyce, the city administrator, resigned. I had a plate full, and I just decided that all said and done, since the city needed to go through the hiring process again of a new city administrator, et cetera, probably a good time for me to step out with the new people, a new mayor, a new city council structure, put it all together because I wasn't sure that I had the ability to put all of my effort into the city that needed to be given to it. So I stepped down. I cried the night that happened. I was so
oh.
brokenhearted.
Hey Jerry, we're kind of around in third base, headed toward home plate right now on our part three in our series on the radio conference call. Wanted to pick your brain a little bit just about, life in general, business in general. Who are some of your mentors and some of the things that you've learned along the way, just in life and in business, how to treat people, how to read people? Who are some of your mentors or heroes coming up in biz?
Well, I think probably the top of my list would be my father, who was my partner, was my best friend. He was he was a lot to me. Um, One of his best friends was Chester Kim. Chester Kim was a guy that was a Wenatchee leader and was the Wenatchee Chamber of Commerce president, worked for the Wenatchee World as their economic and development director. And I admired what he did because he was a man that was very skilled at making things happen that you never knew he even had a hand in. But he was the genius that put it all together. But he always managed to give the accolades to the other people, and it was very comfortable doing that. And I always admired that. I used to always ask myself, what would Chet Kim do in this situation? And I sat in the back seat of the car many times when my father and Chet would be driving someplace, and I'd hear them having their conversations, and I learned a lot from them. I think another mentor might be Carl Tyler, who was the station manager at KPQ when I was first hired at KPQ. Carl Tyler was just an incredible broadcaster, an incredible newsman. Went on to own one of the stations, KHJ, I think it was in Walla Walla. No, what's it?
KUJ.
KUJ, yeah. And and actually was an owner of KW3 with Jim Corcoran at one time. Carl Tyler was somebody that I had high respect for. And of course, my professors at WSU, Colonel Mott, uh, and I, I, I have to tell you, I had a lot of people that I, that I can think of that just along the path of my life just kind of appeared when it was time, gave me great wisdom, helped me think things through. Sometimes I listened, sometimes I didn't, but yeah, I think I feel pretty fortunate.
Jerry, did you prefer being a protege or did you enjoy being a mentor or both?
Probably both, but if I had to choose, I would probably be a mentor. Uh, I mean, you know what? You're only as good as the people that you have around you. And if I can help people, I mean, my job really, in many ways, was to establish the boundaries of the ethics of our company and the beliefs of our company, and then let people go, go do what they did, and just to make sure we stayed within those boundaries. Because there were lots of things that I believed in. We're not going to cheat people. We're never going to lie. We're going to give them their value. I mean, just a simple one. But when you get your bill at the end of the month and it says 27 ads, the customer really has to believe that that's what you got, that they got 27 ads, because they don't listen to the radio station to count all 27 ads. So if we only ran 23 ads, you didn't change it to 27. You charged them for 23, and maybe you told them, hey, we missed a week. I want you to know that. Sorry about that. And so you have some extra budget if you want to spend it later or whatever you did. But at least the most important thing you had was integrity. And if you didn't have integrity with people that you dealt with, you were not going to get very far. So those are the kind of ethics that I tried to teach our people.
And those are the traits that you looked for whenever you were entertaining a new hire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I told you about that process, but when we hired people, we often had the whole staff interview them, and I kind of interviewed them, and I said, okay, now I want you to go around and meet everybody in the station, and one of them should take you to lunch, and you can ask them all the questions of what's good about me and what's bad about me, and I want you to hear both sides of the story. And then after it was all over, the staff would hold a staff meeting, and we would kind of talk it over, because the real issue is they didn't have to work with just me; they had to work with everybody. So the question was, were they going to be compatible to everybody on the staff? So we made a lot of really good hires that way, and we probably saved ourselves from some bad hires too.
Jerry, is there a higher power in your life?
Absolutely, absolutely. How could I not? I mean, when you ask me who my mentor was, my higher power, God, Jesus, you name it, whatever it is for each of us, is my higher power of all. And it's where I turn to when I'm lost and say, I don't know the answer. I said, God, I need you. I'm listening. I'm listening. Tell me what to do. And God doesn't always answer right away. Sometimes he even has me fall in the mud puddle first. But no, I'm pretty philosophical about the whole thing. Life is a great journey. It is what you make of it. I don't think, I used to feel incompetent because of the mistakes that I made, but I really realize now that through all of those, every one of those mistakes came an incredible learning, a lot of learning, and I learned a lot from each of the mistakes. And I guess we hear this a lot, but boy, I wished I knew what I knew now, and I could go back and travel that journey again. But what's interesting is it wouldn't be the same.
No.
Because everything else has changed around. And so, I mean, I was just a guy on a train in a particular time, and it was a great train trip.
It's kind of funny. We were talking before we went on the air. I like to read books of quotes, and read across one last night, and I shared it with you before we came on. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn.
I like that.
I got another one for you.
Yes, please.
If you fall down 7 times, get up 8 times.
I hadn't heard that, but that's the truth. Yeah, one of mine is, I have seen flowers grow in stony places and kind things done by the worst horse at the races. So I trust too. It's just a little short phrase that I often think about. So when things aren't going my way or it doesn't make sense, I just keep the faith. There's a better day around the corner. And even now, in my health and my challenges, personal challenges, I have to tell you, the most important thing that keeps me going is that sense of there's good things around the corner. This interview, by the way, is a good example. You and I have talked about doing this for a long, long time. The fact that we're doing it now comes at a really, really interesting time in my life and in yours. Wow, I'm impressed. Not an accident.
I absolutely have to agree with that, Jerry. And we have future plans of getting together and perhaps putting some radio equipment together, and maybe some museum pieces. We're dreaming about this, and let's make it a reality someday. We'll have further conversations about that. But Jerry, but before I cut you loose today, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to get out there on this third edition of the radio conference call with Jerry Isenhart?
Oh, thank you. Well, you know, there's always the risk when you start naming people that you're going to forget a few or leave them out because your conversation moves too rapidly. I did want to mention that at KOZI during the 90s, our office person in the front office was Carrie Austin. Her name is she was Carrie Pickett back then. She married Glenn Austin, who is a significant businessman here in the Valley today. But Carrie Carrie was the magic of the front office, and she was a CPA by education. And she came in, and she was she was a flight controller. She answered the phone. She did it all. And Carrie was the most astounding person. I mean, and by the way, there's a TV documentary that was done about the fires of Firestorm '94 that was done by one of the Spokane television stations, and I should dig that out and put it on Facebook or something for people to see, to be reminded. But Carrie is in that, and you see her answering the phone, etc. Also, I wanted to just mention that Go Lake Chelan. I mentioned that Go Lake Chelan was a kind of a one man show or two man show, but we had some key volunteers, Heidi Neal and Nancy Miller, and they were volunteers who stepped up and helped me get Go Lake Chelan off the ground, and really added a huge amount of dimension because they had so much connections to the community. And while I was still trying to learn how to spell HTML, which was the coding that we did to make Go Lake Chelan happen, you know, they were busy taking pictures. Nancy Miller was the person that captured the pictures of the falling cow that fell on the roof of a car at Rocky Point and sent me those pictures. And we had them on, and I got a call from ABC News in New York wanting to know if they could use those pictures and interview us. So,
Wow.
you know, I mean, and so we had, you know, Terry Ernest, by the way, from Manson, another photographer who took lots and lots of pictures for us at different times. So we had, once again, even in the Go Lake Chelan world, we had incredible amounts of community participation that was not compensated, people that just did it for the love of community, which was really what Go Lake Chelan and KOZI were both about. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned that. And finally, in closing, I guess the biggest thing is, you know, I wrote a letter to the staff in 1994 about after the fires that I just recently read again as I was prepping for this. But this letter basically said, we're here today celebrating these honors because of a lot of people that worked here before that did the very same kinds of things that we don't even, many of you may not remember or don't even know about. So as we inch along, just remember that we're just on the train, and the train just keeps getting better and better. And thank you for being a part of this incredible group of people. And that's the truth. If we were successful in this community, both at KOZI and at Go Lake Chelan, and I believe we were successful in what way? Successful certainly as serving the community. That was the most important piece. And I do say that the financial compensation always followed. If you built a good mousetrap, it was going to sell. And we built a good mousetrap and it worked. But if we were successful, it was only due to the quality of the people that we were able to bring aboard, the support that we got from the community. And I can't say a big enough thank you. And I say thank you to you for allowing me to bring all of that information into one setting. I mean, I'm sure I left out a lot, but at least we got the primary bases covered, something I've dreamed about doing. I have a dream of writing a book, and I've been writing chapters in it. And so a lot of the information I've relayed to you has come from that and from my memory. But the book would be called Nothing by Chance. And that is, you asked me if I believed in a higher power. And that's where that comes from. I do not believe that my life is an accident. I believe my life was really planned out by my higher power, and he's still guiding me to this day. And I certainly say thank you all the time.
You know, Jerry, you and I had mentioned off mic a little while ago. I had brought to your attention that God gave me you, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, and it worked by both ways. And I think that the timing of our interview today is just so appropriate because I'm not sure I was ready to do this a year ago. I'm not sure I'm ready to do it today, but I did it. But I'm not sure I'll be any better ready tomorrow. So it struck me that the time was to do it now. And I hope that people, it's long and I'm sorry it's long, but the story is complex, but it's magical. It's magical. And if you connect the dots, you can see what a wonderful opportunity this has all been. I couldn't have asked for more.
Mr. KOZI, and so much more, Jerry Isenhart. I am blessed and so grateful for you to join me on this edition of the radio conference call. Thank you so very much, Jerry.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. By the way, keep those cards and letters coming. The people have emailed and written. I really appreciate it. I love hearing from you, and I welcome your feedback.